What's going on, guys? Tower number 9 here, and welcome back to the Saturday spoiler review. This time we're looking over the things from the 6th week of spoilers or previews from Fantasy Flight Games. Let's get started with Yoda Sensing Darkness. Yoda is a vigilance heroism leader. As an action he can exhaust, if a unit left play this phase, draw a card, then put a card from your hand on the top or bottom of your deck. So he's essentially filtering your deck and getting you better draws. He deploys on 7 resources as a 4/9 with the Force Jedi and Republic traits. He has Restore 2, and when deployed you may discard a card from your deck. If you do, defeat an enemy non-leader unit that costs the same as or less than the discarded card. So there is some direct synergy here. If we go back to this side, you can use this ability if a unit left play to draw a card, then put something from your hand on the top or bottom, and then you can have that top card of your deck manipulated and then use this, discard that top card from your deck, and you know what the cost is going to be. So maybe you put an expensive card up there and use this to take out a powerful unit, or maybe you put an inexpensive thing there if you have a cheap unit that you want to target, but seems pretty good. I want to show you another little combo here. This one is probably, I think it's at least kind of obvious, but You're My Only Hope. Look at the top card of your deck. You may play it. It costs 5 less. If your base has 5 or less remaining HP, you may play it for free instead. Well, here's Yoda. He can set what card is on the top of your deck. So he can set up You're My Only Hope and potentially guarantee a big hit. You could see yourself, going for a You're My Only Hope on, potentially on the second turn and bringing out a 5-cost unit somewhat reliably, as long as a unit has left play first. So I think Yoda has some real potential. His ability to sort of rig the deck seems to allow for some nice setups, and I think he could be fairly strong. His 4/9 stat line is decent. So we've seen some other strength 7 or some other 7 resource leaders have a different stat line. So if we look at Vader, for instance, leader Vader here is a 5/8. So 4/9 is same total stats, but different distribution. Personally, I'd probably rather have 5/8, but 4/9 does have some advantages, like not dying to an ECL Poe Dameron. So yeah, I think Yoda has some real potential. Okay, next up, we have the Duchess's Champion. This is a 4-cost double vigilance ground unit, a 1/8 with the Mandalorian trait. While an opponent controls 3 or more units, this unit gains Sentinel. Units in this arena can't attack your non-Sentinel units or your base. So I think the idea behind this is that if your opponent has a swarm deck, they end up having to confront this unit. And it could be really good against like a big swarm of battle droids that only have 1 HP, or against, units like Death Star Stormtrooper where it's a 3/1. Those types of units I think are very efficiently answered by the Duchess's Champion. The main problem that I have is that there are a lot of units that have more than 1 HP, and those units, unless you give the Duchess's Champion some kind of upgrade, it seems to me that this just isn't necessarily going to succeed at holding back all your opponents in the way that you might like. The concept is cool. I like the idea in principle, but I'm not entirely sure how well it's going to work out in practice unless battle droid swarms become common. And even if they do, I have a feeling those decks are going to end up using exploit. So I don't know. Unlimited Power, 6-cost double aggression event. Deal 4 damage to a unit, 3 damage to a second unit, 2 damage to a third unit, and 1 damage to a fourth unit. All damage is dealt simultaneously. So you're paying 6, and this is a total of 10 damage, but you have to spread it in a specific way. Additionally, there's one big downside of this card that is not immediately apparent, and that downside is if you use this, and the opponent does not have 4 units, you have to target your own side. You cannot overkill a unit by stacking multiple versions of this on it. And as a result, you might well have to hit your own side if your opponent does not have 4 or more units. So that is a potential major problem with this card, in my opinion, at least. And ultimately, this card seems to me to be worse than Overwhelming Barrage, and it's more expensive, and it's double aspect. And that makes me not that excited. Now, it does have some advantages. For one thing, you can play it even if you don't have a unit in play yourself. And that might actually be the way to go, because if you play this while you don't have a unit yourself, there's no risk of having to hit your own side. So, interesting overall card. Ultimately, I think the fact that you might have to hit your own side is too much of a downside, but we'll have to see. You could also potentially run this in a deck that has a bunch of grit units or other ones that are benefited from taking damage, and then you're actually turning that downside into an upside. But maybe you have like a double red Kylo, and you play this card and you hit your fifth brother, and now he's going to hit harder on the offense, stuff like that. But I'm not sure. Personally, I'm kind of skeptical. We'll have to see though. Next up, Republic Defense Carrier, 11 cost, 6/7 command heroism space unit. This unit costs 1 less to play for each unit controlled by the opponent who controls the most units. So it is worth noting that this apparently works. Even if you have more units than your opponent, it is the opponent who controls the most units, or another way to say it might be the player who controls the most units among your opponents. The problem is that the base cost of 11 is absolutely horrible for a 6/7 Sentinel. If you were to pay, like, let's say your opponent has 4 units and you pay 7, I'm like, it's cool then, but how often does that happen? And it's not like amazingly cool. It's like cool. I don't know. If swarms become a big thing this set, I could see something like this being successful. I really could. If swarms become a big thing this set, I could see something like this becoming successful. Will they actually do that? We'll have to see. But I think the idea of it at least is cool, and the question is just, are you going to be able to discount it enough to be excited about playing it? And I don't really know, to be honest with you. I'm kind of skeptical, but strange things have happened before. Republic Arc 170, 3 cost command space unit, 3/4. This one, on the other hand, I think is solid. 3 for a 3/4 in space is just a pretty good stat line. Trades pretty effectively with a lot of the early fighters people are running, including the newer 3/2 fighters, as well as some of the other ones. Overall, this just seems like a solid... This just seems like a solid card to me. And I think that there is, like, yes, it doesn't have text, but you don't need to have text. There are good vanilla cards, and I think this might be one of them. I think it could fit easily into a bunch of decks as a potential opponent for early space fighters, especially if you have ways to ambush it in. I think it could be quite strong. Subjugating Starfighter, 4 cost 3/3 command space unit, separatist vehicle fighter. It has ambush. When played, if you have the initiative, create a battle droid token. 4 for a 3/3 is pretty bad, even if it does have ambush, but you can still pick off some of those early fighters with it. And if you have the initiative, create a battle droid token is pretty cool. The main downside that I see with this is the fact that it's a 3/3. A 4th point of HP would really help here. You look at like Azatec Liberator Gunship, which is a 4 cost 3/4 with ambush, and that one can attack into a mercenary gunship or a Kylo's TIE silencer and remain alive. This unit can't do that, but at least maybe you get a battle droid token out of it. I don't know. I don't think it's horrible, but I don't think it's great. Next up, Encouraging Leadership, 3 cost command event. Give each friendly unit +1/+1 for this phase. I think this is really bad. I think that events that give temporary HP tend to be bad, except for Overwhelming Barrage, which is good for... Overwhelming Barrage is not good because of the temporary HP. Let's put it like that. Like, the temporary HP is cool, but that's not why you play Overwhelming Barrage. This card does give +1 power, but I don't know that it's worth it. Yeah, it's just not very exciting for me. It's kind of slow. It only really gets a lot of value if you have a really big board. Your opponent has chances to mess with you. Damage dealt to the temporary HP might end up killing you once the HP wears off, even if it doesn't do the damage immediately. This type of thing is just not something that I find very positive. Cards like Tactical Advantage and Moment of Glory also aren't seeing very much play, and I think there's a reason for that, unfortunately. It's a cool idea, it just, like, I don't feel like it's there. Next up, Dendup's Loyalist. I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce that name. 2 cost aggression ground unit, 2/3 with Overwhelm, Fringe and Trooper traits. So this is kind of a straightforward unit. The problem with it is that Overwhelm is anti-synergistic with this stat line. So Overwhelm, when attacking an enemy unit, deal excess damage to the opponent's base, but it's on a unit with 2 attack. So how often is there even going to be excess damage? Maybe not that often. At least it works well if you can upgrade it or give it some kind of temporary attack buff or something to allow it to hit harder. But overall, I think there are better units. Even if you restricted yourself to only choosing 2 cost 2/3 units, there are better units in that space, in my opinion. I think the First Legion Snowtrooper, for instance, is a 2 cost 2/3 that is likely better than this. So ultimately, I think this is kind of a filler card, kind of a draft oriented card. We'll have to see. Independent Senator, 1 cost hunting ground unit, 0/4 separatist official. Action, spend 2 resources and exhaust to exhaust a unit with 4 or less power. This seems really bad. I'll show you why. It's called Grogu. So you look at Grogu. Grogu costs 1 more. He has an extra HP. He has the Force trait, which is really good. And as an action, he just exhausts to exhaust the enemy unit. Now we look at the Independent Senator, and he spends 2, and he can only exhaust units with 4 or less power. He seems like Grogu, except much worse. I guess maybe you play him in some kind of Separatist synergy deck or something where it's like, oh, having this guy around, he's kind of hard to kill at first, do the 4 HP, and you can then remove him for exploit later, but he's not feeling great to me. Not feeling great to me. B1 Security Team. This one, on the other hand, I think is interesting. So B1 Security Team is a 2-cost 3/1 cunning ground unit. Separatist droid and trooper traits. It has Sentinel. Units in this arena can't attack your non-Sentinel units or your base. So a 3/1 Sentinel is actually kind of cool. There are a bunch of units that this would trade with that a weaker unit like the Pike Sentinel, which is a 2-cost 2/3 Sentinel, would end up getting defeated by. A good example is Battlefield Marine, 2-cost 3/3. B1 Security Team trades with a Battlefield Marine. Pike Sentinel dies to a Battlefield Marine and the Marine stays alive. So bit of an interesting scenario there, but you know, ultimately I think this is going to be at least possibly a good card. I could see this even seeing some constructed play. The main downside that I see for it is that it is extremely vulnerable to ping damage, so things like Cad Bane, you know, Bo-Katan's leader ability, Vader's leader ability, various other sources of just like 1 damage at a time pose a big problem for this unit with this profile, but at the same time, hitting that 3 power breakpoint is, I think, relevant enough that I could easily see this seeing some play. In Pursuit, 0-cost event, exhaust a friendly unit. If you do, exhaust an enemy unit. Very cool art on this card also, in my opinion. But when I think about the gameplay value of this, a 0-cost exhaust is actually very strong, in my opinion. The question is just whether you're going to have a friendly unit to exhaust to use it. And I think it will work well with things like battle droid tokens and more support-oriented units. So, you know, if you have something like, I don't know, one of those units that's like a 1/4 with a support type power, like a regional governor or something like that, just sitting around, you know, often with those sorts of units, players might not even consider it worth it to attack with them, but instead just take the initiative. Well, In Pursuit gives you something good to do with them. Now, is it going to be reliable enough? That needs to be tested, but I think at least in principle, this could be quite strong. 0-cost events are good. Zero cost things that can take your opponent by surprise are very good for sort of making a turn go in an unexpected direction, and I think In Pursuit may well be in that category. Droid Starfighter, 1-cost 1/2, space unit, villainy, separatist droid vehicle fighter, and it has Saboteur. When this unit attacks, ignore Sentinel and defeat the defender's shields. Saboteur is kind of cool, but like defeating shields only to do 1 damage is not that good. If this were a 2/2, I would be way more enthusiastic about it because it would be able to kill 7th Fleet Defender in 1 hit through its shield, but it's not, and it can't. And overall, this is not a very exciting card to me. I think in this role, much of the time, I would rather just be playing the normal TIE Fighter that's just a 2/1 vanilla. 1/2 with Saboteur. I don't know. It doesn't seem like a great profile to me. Maybe we're going to see some like 1 HP shielded ships that are quite good that makes this more relevant, but as it stands, I'm just not thrilled by this stat line. Super Battle Droid, 3-cost 4/3 vanilla. It is villainy with the Separatist droid and trooper traits. 3-cost 4/3 vanilla is at least kind of playable. That Swoop Racer from earlier was a 3-cost 4/3 vanilla and saw play at least in limited. I think the Super Battle Droid will similarly be a card that might see some play in limited, but you know, you really want your cards to be doing more than this, especially because if they continue to print 3-cost 3/5s, the 4/3 stat line is not going to be that good. I personally think Echo-based Defender's value in particular has gone down a lot because of the increase in 3-cost 3/5s. Super Battle Droid doesn't have that problem as much because it's not a Sentinel, but might still suffer from a similar issue. Grievous's Wheel Bike. Now, this is a crazy one. This is a 4-cost upgrade. When playing this upgrade on General Grievous, though, it costs 2 less to play. So you can play it for only 2 on Grievous. Attached to a non-vehicle unit, and the attached unit gains Overwhelm and +3/+3. I think this card is sweet. I think it's very strong with General Grievous in particular. 2 for +3/+3 and Overwhelm is great. That's just like, that's a very good rate. And 4 for +3/+3 and Overwhelm on another unit might well be strong under the right circumstances. I think this will be solid for Grievous decks. It is worth noting that this works on both versions of Grievous. Yeah, you know, I think not a ton else to say. I think this is a cool card. Droid Deployment, 2-cost event, create 2 battle droid tokens, seems good. You know, getting 2/1/1s and it only costs you 1 card. Good against 1-for-1 removal. Good to set up exploit. Overall, I think this will be a solid kind of baseline card, and if you have ways to buff battle droids and so on, it will get even better. Merciless Contest. Each player chooses a non-leader unit they control to defeat those units, and it is a 3-cost villainy event. So this is an interesting one. If you don't have a unit you control, you can still play this and make your opponent lose a unit, which is pretty cool. It doesn't work on leaders, but otherwise might be considered similar to Power of the Dark Side. Some of the villain control decks would already do things like skip their first turn and just immediately play Power of the Dark Side. Well, if you do Merciless Contest instead, that's just as good, and you can save your real Power of the Dark Side for later when you can potentially defeat an enemy leader, or when you have more units of your own on the board, or something like that. I think this card has a lot of potential and will likely see play in both limited and constructed. You can also, of course, kind of balance, alter the equation by having things like battle droid tokens that are going to be the unit that you defeat, and they have to defeat something more powerful and expensive. So overall, I think it's quite good when you don't have units, and in the right situation, it can be good even when you do have units. Could also be a way to enable some when defeated effects on your side. Okay. Atte 2 Light Interceptor, 5-cost heroism space unit, 3/4 with the Republic vehicle and fighter traits, restore 2. This card is, in my opinion, horrible. It immediately reminds me of Regional Sympathizers, except I think it's worse. So Regional Sympathizers is 4 for a 3/4 ground unit with restore 2. And when we look back, the Atte 2 Light Interceptor is 5 for a 3/4 space unit with restore 2. I think that is so not worth it. You can get a 3-cost 3/4 in space. Yes, you don't get restore 2, but restore 2 is not worth 2 resources. I think this card is very overpriced. I think Regional Sympathizers was overpriced, and I think this card is more overpriced. I am very pessimistic about it. I'm not saying never play it. It might be good in some draft situations and so on, but I would say this is a very underwhelming card to me, just solely on price. The other thing is, like, look, take a look at this 3/4 restore 2 for 5. We now are going to look at Razor Crest. Razor Crest is a 4-cost 3/4 restore 2. So it already costs less for the same thing, and it has an additional ability for extra upside. I don't know. This is really looking bad to me, and I'm not at all optimistic about it. Atte Vanguard, 8 costs 6/9 with restore 3. When this unit attacks, heal 3 damage from your base, and when defeated, create 2 clone trooper tokens. It is a heroism ground unit. This card's kind of cool. The main problem that I have with it is no immediate board impact, which is a problem for a lot of expensive units. The when defeated kind of helps, because if the opponent does manage to defeat it, they don't actually eliminate all that value. So if you get hit by a Fell the Dragon or a Vanquish or whatever, and you lose this unit, you still get those 2 clone troopers, which is quite nice. However, I'm not sure it makes up for the inefficiency when first being played, which is kind of the issue for me. Ahsoka's Padawan lightsaber, 1-cost heroism upgrade, attached to a non-vehicle unit, +2 power, and when played, if the attached unit is Ahsoka Tano, you may attack with a unit. It does not have to be Ahsoka herself, so you can potentially play this on your leader Ahsoka, who's already deployed and attacked, and use the ability here to action compress an attack from another unit, which I think is really cool. 1 for a +2/+0 upgrade seems cool, and at least potentially worth it. We see 1 for +1/+1 upgrades that have some upside. This is 1 for a +2/+0 upgrade that has some upside. +2/+0 is probably better than +1/+1 at least some of the time, so I think this is a pretty cool looking card. Drop in 4-cost event, create 2 clone trooper tokens. So that's 4/4 in terms of total stats, but if the opponent plays 1-for-1 removal, it won't be that efficient. So maybe there's some upside there. Like, if you could say, well, why would I play this to get 2 T2s when I could play Keenan and get a 4/5, which is more total stats, and he has a good ability? Well, one benefit of drop in is its resilience to 1-for-1 removal. Another benefit is that if you have clone synergies and stuff, this seems like a potentially good way to set them up. The awkward part about this card is that it can't cost 3.5. I feel like if it cost 3, it would be probably too good. I think when it costs 4, it's more than I want to pay for it. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. It's definitely in kind of a gray area. If it cost 3.5, maybe that would be perfect, but that's not really a thing the game system supports. Oh, and I think I may have said this already, but clone trooper tokens are 2/2s with the Republic clone and trooper traits. Next up, Prey Vizla, Pursuing the Throne. Is it Prey or Pre? Let's say pre. I like that more. So pre-Vizla, action, spend 1 resource and exhaust. Deal damage to a unit equal to the number of cards you've drawn this phase. This does not include cards drawn in the regroup phase. So basically, if you have card draw from sources other than just the normal end of turn regroup stuff, or it's potentially pretty good. Like, having a directed ping like that could be sweet. The main problem I see with this is just that card draw effects aren't very good right now. So the question is, like, is this one of those cards where, yeah, there's a combo, but the combo requires you to play cards that aren't really that good? The best combos are from cards that are already good on their own that become great, instead of things where you have some like weaker cards that can combine to do something cool. When you flip Pre-Vizla, he is a 4/6 Mandalorian trooper. While you have 3 or more cards in your hand, he gains Saboteur, and while you have 6 or more cards in your hand, he gets +2 power. So the idea is definitely to try to get a lot of card draw, and then you potentially have a 5-cost 6/6 Saboteur leader, which would be amazing. How likely are you to actually get that? To be honest, I don't think it's that likely, but 5 for a 4/6 isn't terrible, and the first condition at least doesn't seem all that hard to achieve with 3 or more cards in hand. So, we'll have to see where he ends up, but I think he puts a cool spin on some stuff and might make players reevaluate, oh, do I want to be playing that card draw stuff after all? Maybe I do. So, we'll have to see how he does. Brain Invaders, 4-cost generic, aka aspectless card. It is a 2/4 with the fringe trait. Each leader loses all abilities except for epic actions and can't gain abilities. And this applies to both leaders and to leader units. So the can't gain abilities thing is actually already relevant. So for instance, if you had Protector, which gives you +1/+1, and Sentinel, that actually does not work. The stats work, but the Sentinel does not work because that would be a gained ability. Or, Infiltrator's skill to give Saboteur. Again, Saboteur does not work because Saboteur is an ability. Now, 4 for a 2/4 is a very, very, very bad stat line. 3 for a 2/4 is honestly a bad stat line. So I think this is weird and like off tempo enough that it seems disadvantageous to play it under most circumstances, but maybe there's going to be some games where you really want to stop your opponent's leader ability for whatever reason. Count Dooku Fallen Jedi, 8-cost aggression villainy ground unit. He's a 6/6 with the Force, Separatist, and Sith traits. Exploit 2 and Overwhelm. When played, for each unit you exploited while playing this card, you may deal damage to an enemy unit equal to the power of the exploited unit. I think this guy is so cool, and he really puts an interesting twist on the exploit mechanic. So like most exploit units, if you pay 8 for this, it's probably bad. 8 for a 6/6 Overwhelm is really not very good. You could, for that same 8 resources, you could play Emperor Palpatine and get a 6/6 Overwhelm and get to spread 6 damage among opposing units, which would be way better. However, if you play him with Exploit, not only do you get him out sooner and cheaper, but you also get to deal damage to enemy units and potentially cause them a lot of problems. Even if you are just exploiting the basic B1 battle droids and doing 1 damage, then that could still be what you need to ping off a shield from an opponent, finish off a low HP unit. And he adds a lot of interesting strategy in terms of like, oh, let's say I have like a Death Star Stormtrooper or something. Now all of a sudden I can exploit that and deal bonus damage, and that might make it worth it for me to get rid of that instead of one of these basic droids. You might even be exploiting more expensive and powerful stuff to get that direct damage. I think he adds a lot of options and choices in a way that I think is very positive. So I'm a fan of Count Dooku Fallen Jedi. Very cool card. Very cool card. Satine Kryze, Kryze, I don't actually know how to pronounce that, committed to peace. She is a 4-cost Vigilance Heroism ground unit, 0/6 Mandalorian official. Each unit, including enemy units, gains action, exhaust, discard cards from an opponent's deck equal to half the team's remaining HP rounded up. So Satine is a mill enabler. She allows every unit in the game, including your opponent's units, to become mill cards where you can exhaust them to mill your opponent instead of fighting. I think that's an interesting way to represent, trying a more pacifist approach. You're shunning the direct violence, but you're trying to win a war of words or whatever. And so I think Satine is a very interesting card. Is she actually going to be super good? Honestly, I don't know. In the past, mill strategies were really held back by restock. And I think if mill becomes good, restock starts going into sideboards, and maybe mill stops being as good. But the idea is interesting at least, and I know some people like mill decks, and it'll be interesting to see whether they have enough support to be very strong. Padme Amidala, Pursuing Peace. 2 cost, Cunning Heroism Ground Unit 1/4 with the Naboo Republican official traits. Coordinate on attack. Give an enemy unit -3 power for this phase. Gain this ability while you control 3 or more units. So 2 for a 1/4 is quite solid, in my opinion. That's a pretty solid stat line if the ability is good. And because she is difficult to remove, she will help enable coordinate, which I think is quite positive. The main downside that I see is that her actual coordinate on attack is a little awkward, but there are some situations where it could be good. Imagine that you attack with Padme, you have coordinate enabled by a bunch of clone troopers, and this allows you to give -3 to a sentinel, and you can then overwhelm it with a swarm of clone troopers without losing them in the attack. So I think she could be very synergistic with a multiple small units coordinate type strategy, which seems pretty fitting for the Republic. Is that strategy going to be good as a whole? To be honest, I don't know. I kind of hope that it is because it seems cool, and I could easily see her being a piece of the puzzle in that case. Okay. And that is it for this week's spoilers. Thanks to you all for watching, and we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.